Today I'll be showing you what's new in GIMP 2.99.14, which will of course go on to become GIMP 3.0, hopefully sooner rather than later. Before I get into that, don't forget to check out my GIMP 2.10 Masterclass from beginner to pro photo editing on Udemy. And you can also enroll in my WordPress for Beginners 2023 no-code WordPress Masterclass also on Udemy. And I'll include links to these courses as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So this is a development release version, which means some of the things I'll be showing you today will be a little buggy and will be a little bit unpolished as well. But with that in mind, the first new feature I want to cover is the new alignment tool. So the alignment tool is over here in the toolbox under the first tool group. And if you click and drag on that move tool and release your mouse, it should choose the alignment tool, or you can use the Q shortcut key. So let's come over here to this composition I've created. I've got three layers here. I've got a square layer, so this red square, a circle layer, blue circle, and then the background layer. And one thing I want to note about these layers is they are all the same size right now. So the circle layer is the full size of the image here. Let me just come over here and grab the move tool. So if I were to click and drag the circle, you could see the layer outline there. It's this yellow dotted line, of course, and the circle is just sort of up and to the left of the center of the layer. So the red square layer, same thing, except it's located a little bit below and to the right of the center of the layer. So that's going to come into play here in a second. So let's hit Control Z to back up. So let's hit the Q key to grab that alignment tool. So under Align and Distribute in the tool options, you have now this area called Targets, and you have selected layers checked by default. So this is a little confusing because now with the new alignment tool, selected layers basically has to be checked for the alignment features to work. If this is unchecked, the alignment features get grayed out and you can no longer use them. I don't know why they decided to do that. I just feel like it adds sort of an unnecessary step to the user experience, but that's how they've decided to do it. And so the reason that you have this checkbox now, selected layers, is that what you do with the alignment tool, instead of clicking and dragging to select all the layers you want to align, which is how it's always been done in GIMP for the most part, now what you do is you come over here and you select all the layers you want to align. This, in theory, I think is an improvement. So if I hold Shift and select the two layers I want to align, it'll say 2 items selected, and now I can work on aligning these 2 layers. So in theory, this is how it should be, I think. Although I'm sure there's plenty of cases where you will see multiple layers on the canvas and you'll just want to click and drag to select the items you can see, and it may get a little complicated having to figure out where certain layers are located in the layers panel. So that's one use case where this new system maybe won't work as well. So now what I would do is come over here and use the alignment features the way I usually would. And right now, by default, the anchor point, which is basically the main point around which we are going to align things, is in the middle of the layers. So that's this little graph right here, which is also new. It says set anchor point of targets. So we are left aligning to the image based on the centers of the layers that we have selected over here. So that's why when I just left align this, it's centered on this left edge, but it did so using the center points of these layers. So if I come over here and right align, it'll just shift the anchor over here to the right side of the image. So now this is aligned to the centers of these layers over to the right side of our composition. And if I were to do the same for the top, you'll see what happens there. The anchor point here is going to align to the right and the top. So that's why it moves over here. Or we can move it over to the bottom, same thing, except flipped. So now we're aligning there. I don't want to get too much into the weeds of that, but just trying to make that make sense to you guys. So let's just center align that both vertically and horizontally. So you can change the anchor point now if you want to align based on the left side of the layers. You can now choose that left anchor point. You can also align based on the top left, for example, bottom right, whatever you want to do. So let's go top left here and just align this to the left. And you'll see here, it's not going to make total sense just because of the anchor point I chose. But in this case, if I have the top left selected as the anchor point, and then I horizontally align this The top of the anchor point is right around here for each one of these layers. So this is basically center aligning this right here, which is why our two layers sort of dip down a little bit there. So let's select the middle anchor point and then just center align that. So the reason I have these shapes sort of offset on the middle of their respective layers is because there's now a new feature right here called Use Extents of Layer Contents. So when that option is checked, now what's going to happen is it's going to align based on the pixels of the layer and not the layer boundary itself. So now we're going to align just based on the circle pixels on this layer and the square pixels on this layer. So if I come over here and we have a line set to relative to image, and I click to vertically align this and then horizontally align it, you'll see what happens there is that now we are aligning based on the objects inside the layer and not based on the layer boundary. So now the circle and square are middle aligned to each other. So that's actually a really nice feature in theory. So now let's hit Control Z and Control Z again. The reason I say that's a good feature in theory is that the relative to option for this doesn't really work. So if I go to picked reference object, that's supposed to be like a key object in Illustrator. It says select the reference object, and then it's telling you what your current reference layer is. In this case, it is our background. So what I'm supposed to be able to do is just left click, and you'll see that now it says the reference layer is the circle. So now in theory, what should happen is the square here should now align to the pixels of the circle. So basically the square should be directly centered with the circle, both vertically and horizontally. So this should move over to right here. But if I come over here and I click center align, you'll see it doesn't really do it properly. And if I click that again, so now we have vertical and horizontal alignment. It's way off. It's way over here to the right. Let me hit the M key real quick, and it should be right here in theory. So that's how I think that should work. So it doesn't really work properly right now. I do think that's something that's a work in progress and that the GIMP team will have to tweak. So let's hit the Q key to grab the alignment tool again. So another confusing thing is you have this selected paths option. So you can align paths, but I guess you have to have selected paths checked. And that to me is just confusing. Let me come over here to the paths tab. And let's hit the B key for Bezier curves. That's how you draw paths. So let's just draw a path here real quick and make sure that is unhidden. And come back over here to layers, hit the Q key to grab the alignment tool. So selected paths is selected. So if I click on the path, you'll see that can now be selected for alignment. And then let's see if I shift click, that's not doing anything. So let's just click on the path. And that should now throw it in the mix with these two layers. And let's change this to image for relative to and now align these. So there you'll see it does align everything, including the path. So you have to turn on selected paths, I guess, to include that in your alignments. And yeah, I just feel like that's not very clear as to why you need to do that. Maybe being able to select paths automatically should be checked, or maybe this should be located somewhere else. I don't know. It just feels like a lot to me from a user experience perspective. And finally, something else you could do here now in this latest development version is you can alt pick target guides. So these are these right here. So if I alt click, you're going to see guides now light up as red when they are selected for alignment. And you'll see here it says one guide will be aligned or distributed. And if you hold Shift Alt, you can add more to your alignment selection. So let's hold Alt, Shift key, click on the guide. Now we have two guides that we're going to align. And now let's say we left align this. So the guides will align along with the selected layers. And we can right align that. And if I turn off selected layers, it'll only align the guides there. So now I'm getting why they have this selected layers checkbox. And if we bring back selected layers and selected paths, now it's going to align everything. So now I see the purpose of that is to just make sure that you can turn on or off certain things. It does kind of seem like if you're going to have a selected paths checkbox, you would want to also have a selected guides checkbox. That way people know you can also do guides instead of having it as a separate thing down here. That seems confusing to me. The next new feature I think is a really cool one because it is in very high demand. I get requests for this all the time. So let's come over here to our image This is actually for the text tool. So we have our text tool here in the toolbox. And let's just swap the colors there. And I'm just going to hold the caps lock key there, or just turn that on. And let's just type GIMP. So you'll see here that when I typed GIMP, I did not get actual letters. What I got were outlines of letters. So that is the new feature. GIMP now offers non-destructive outlines around your text. So I was messing with this earlier, which is why it came up by default here. If I hit Control A to select the text, and I come over here to the tool options, you'll see here we now have some new options, including style. So this now says outlined with a drop down. So if I wanted this to be the standard filled text, I can click filled. And so now it's going to shift that back to the default. So now we just have regular text, and it's going to fill it in with our current foreground color. Or I can do outlined, which is what I just had. Or I could change this to outlined and filled. So now our text would have both of those options there. And the reason that the outline looks a little weird is that right now I have this set to pattern for outline. So anytime you have either of these style options set to either option that has outlined in there, you'll then get these outline options. And right now I have this set to pattern, so you can use patterns or a solid color, and then I have this blue squares pattern selected, so I can click on that and change this if I wanted to. Or I could change this back to a solid color. So right now this is set to dark gray or a lighter gray, and you can click on the solid color option there and change that color to anything you want. So there you'll see now that updates the outline color to blue. And anti-aliasing is available there, which just helps to smooth out any curves that you have with the outline. And so some of these outline options will probably look familiar to you guys because it's actually the same options that you'll see whenever you stroke a path. So if I come over here to the Paths tab, and we don't have a path in this composition, so let's just create a new path, click OK. So if I had a path here and I wanted to stroke the path, I can click Paint Along Path, and then you're going to see you have some line style options, and you've got line width here and anti-aliasing, and you've got cap style, join style, all this stuff. So let's exit out of there and come back to the Layers panel. So now under Outline Options, you have line width now available here. So that's going to be the width of the actual stroke around the text. So let's go ahead and increase that to 50 pixels there. So much larger stroke. I would like to see something where, for example, you could have the stroke be on the outer edge of the fill of your text or the inner edge, but I know GIMP does not have that functionality yet. Let's change this to a smaller line width, so 10, just for demonstration purposes. So there you'll see now we have a smaller stroke around there. So I'll just change this back to 25, hit the Enter key. You also have the line style here, so I can click to expand that. So you have cap style, join style, miter limit. These were all things that were inside those stroke to path options. So if I hold Control, zoom in. So cap style is going to be pretty much anywhere where the stroke ends. In this case, we don't really have any endpoints in here. But the join style allows you to change, when the path is changing direction, how that sort of plays out. Right now you've got a sharper edge or a squared edge. You could change that to a rounded edge. So that's going to kind of round out all the edges here. Or you could change it to a beveled edge, which is what you see there. And if I click back on here, this should change it to a squared edge, but it looks like it's kind of doing it, but that's maybe not the behavior I would expect there. The miter limit, that's just basically how far out you're willing to let these edges go. So depending on what you have selected, that may or may not do anything. Let's just set this back to 0. Join style we'll set back to miter. And then you also have a dash pattern here. So if you want to set a custom dash pattern for the stroke around your text, you can click and drag your mouse on here, and that's going to draw that custom dash pattern, or you can choose a dash preset. So a standard line is what we had here for the default value, but you can also do dashes if you want. You can do dots, everything you can do with the strokes option there. And you can see here the dense dots don't really work properly, so maybe that's a little bit of a bug. Same with the stipples. So let's just go back to line and keep that set to line. So I think this is sort of buggy a little bit right now as I'm playing with the options. There's sort of sometimes working properly, sometimes not. So maybe a little work to do there, but I do think that is a very promising feature because you can go back at any time and edit the outline, change the color, remove the outline, remove the fill, whatever you want to do, and it makes the text much more non-destructive. So I'm just going to come over here and delete that text, hold Control, zoom out with my mouse wheel, or you can hit Control-Shift-J, and that's going to align your image inside of your canvas. The next new feature is that the transform tools now automatically are activated when you grab them, basically. So if I hit Shift-S to grab my scale tool, it's now automatically going to put the handles here on our image. So you used to have to, once you grabbed the scale tool from the toolbox here, you would have to click on the image to get the handles to display. But now it's just going to automatically have the handles here whenever you grab the tool, and you can get right to scaling it in this case or transforming it. So let's hit the escape key. So let's just come over here and grab another tool. Let's go with the perspective tool. So you'll see there the perspective handles automatically display. That just makes this more intuitive because I think new users grab a tool and they expect it to do something and it doesn't do anything, so they don't really know what's going on with the tool, why it's not working. This just eliminates a step from the user experience. So let's hit the escape key to get rid of that. Pretty simple implementation there, but I think very useful. The next new feature has to do with floating selections. So I think this has, for some reason, become a bit of a contentious topic because some people really like floating selections, others hate them, while others still don't know what they are. So a floating selection is just any time really you bring a new composition into your current composition. So let's say you import an image by clicking and dragging it onto here, or you import a layer, for example. Let's click on this circle layer, click and drag this over to this composition and release. So this used to produce, I believe, a floating selection layer. Let's just get rid of the perspective tool, by the way, by grabbing the move tool. So now it's just going to automatically create new layers when you bring in new layers to a composition, as opposed to creating a floating selection, which then you would have to click the create a new layer button, and it was just way too many steps and people didn't understand how that worked. Now it's just going to automatically create new layers when you import new layers or import new images into an existing composition. Another example of that is if you copy and paste things. So let's grab the lasso tool and just sort of cut out a section here and hit the enter key. So if I were to hit Control-C to copy that and then Control-V to paste, before what would happen is it would paste it as a floating selection layer, but now it just pastes it as its own new layer. Let's say Control-Z, make sure we're clicked on this image layer here. So Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste. Now it just automatically pastes that as its own new layer instead of as a floating selection. There are exceptions to this, so there are going to be cases where floating selections will still be created. So let's say Control-Z to back up. So we're back to just our standard image layer there. Let's hit the M key to grab the move tool. So the first exception to the floating selection update is going to be whenever you are copying or cutting certain pixels inside of a selection area, such as this one right here, using a shortcut key. So I actually did not know this shortcut key existed before reading the 2.99.14 release documents. So right now I have my lasso tool selected. You can grab that over here using the F shortcut key or inside the toolbox. So when you have this tool selected, if you hold Control and Alt, it's going to display this little mouse pointer with the move tool on it. And now actually what you can do is click and drag this selection area and release. And so what that's doing is it's automatically cutting this area out and then just moving it to the new location you just selected or just dragged your mouse to. And so now you'll see over here the floating layer does actually show up, so it is going to still work in this case. And now you get to choose what you want to do. You can anchor it to an existing layer such as the one below, or you can put it on its own new layer. So that was the old behavior with all the floating selection stuff. You'd have to add it to a new layer or anchor it. So that just kind of keeps the old system for that particular case. So let's hit Control-Z to back up. So another shortcut key is going to be the Alt and Shift key. So this is the same as what we just did, except instead of cutting the area out, it's going to copy it. and then you can move it over so you'll see the original area remains, but now we have a copy over here, and that copy is on a floating selection layer, or just a floating layer, I guess, as it's now labeled. And then you can place that on a new layer or anchor that to the existing layer below, which is what I just did. And now it's going to merge those two things together. So Control Z to back up. You can also put that on a new layer. Now this little copied area is on its own new layer. So I'll hit Control Z to back up. So another example of where the floating selection layer is still going to exist is going to be whenever you are copying and pasting onto a layer mask. So we've got this image here. Let's say we add a layer mask to the layer. And let's give it a white full opacity layer mask and click Add. And let's hit Control Z. I do have the invert mask option checked, so I'll uncheck that, click Add. Now we have a white layer mask. So if I were to click on the original image, Control C to copy that, and I'm not entirely sure if this will work, so let's click on the layer mask, Control V to paste. So yeah, there you can see it's going to paste those pixels to the layer mask, but it's still going to give us a floating selection, and actually in this case they're now calling it a floating mask, so that is definitely new. So now you can either anchor this to the layer mask or create a new layer. So let's just anchor that to the layer mask, see what that does. And so yeah, now that area we just copied and pasted is now on this layer mask. So let's come over here, right click, and go to Delete Layer Mask. The last use case where you will still see the floating selection layer or the floating layer option is if you were to float a selection. So let's just draw another selection area, hit the Enter key, right click on this, and go to Select Float. So that takes the pixels we just selected and then cuts it out of the original layer and then floats it here on a floating layer. So we will still have a floating selection layer or a floating layer whenever we use that feature, and we can once again do the same options there. I'm not going to go through it again. And by the way, you can also exit out of the floating selection, and that just basically deletes it. In this case, it creates a cutout from the original layer, so let's just hit Control Z to back up and Control Shift A. All right, so let's get into some of the preferences updates that were made to GIMP 2.99.14. Let's go to Edit, Preferences. So the first item here under Preferences is that we get a new theme. So under Theme, we can choose the gray option. And I know that seems really boring to some of you, but I guess for artists, having a gray option just helps the interface sort of fade into the background while you're working. So it's not really sticking out too much. It's just, you know, out of the way and it's not distracting your eye. So this is supposed to be better for artists. Let's go back to System. Another new option you have here inside of Preferences is you can now have the override icon sizes set by the theme checked. So this is a new option, and the reason this exists is that GIMP has sort of reworked how icons are resized and also what other elements are resized based on your desktop or your computer monitor. So when that option is unchecked, it's going to revert back to the default sizes for everything based on your resolution for your monitor. So you can see my icons here are much smaller. And also the swatches are now going to increase or decrease in size. So these are now also part of resizing, as are the little icons here on all your tabs and also the thumbnails down here. So now if I come over here and check this option, it allows you to override the defaults, which then means you can scale these items up or down. Right now I have these set to large. You can go up to huge. So you'll see the swatches now get bigger. These little icons down here get bigger. I did say these thumbnails get bigger. That's actually separate. But these little icons get bigger. These icons here all get bigger over here. So that should help you guys be able to more easily see the various aspects of the UI. I like having this set to large, so I'll put that back to large. And when you're ready, click OK. The next new feature has to do with exporting PDFs out of GIMP. So I have a PDF open here, and you'll see I have a bunch of pages. So let's say that you have these organized into layer groups. So let's create a new layer group, and then let's put a couple pages inside of here. So let's say you had a bunch of pages or a bunch of items inside a single layer group, and you wanted this layer group to represent one page. So So you didn't want to export all three of these layers as separate pages. You wanted them all to go out as a single page, this one right here. Well, now you can go to File, Export As, and let's just name this GIMP Book of Layers Test. I'm probably not going to actually save this. So if I hit the Enter key, it'll export that, but it's going to bring up the Export Image as PDF dialog. So if I come over here, I can check Layers as Pages. So that ensures that all the layers I have opened here are exported as separate pages. And then this is the new option here, which is Root Layers Only. So that is going to export a layer group as its own page. Basically, if you had multiple layer groups, all of those layer groups export as a single page. So if I had one here, one here, one here, we would have 3 separate pages for each layer group. On the other hand, if you wanted the individual layers inside of layer groups to be exported still as separate pages, you could just uncheck the Root Layers Only option, and those separate layers would still be exported as their own layers, so keep that in mind. And then once you're ready, hit Export. So there's also been several updates made to other file types. For example, the XCF file saving speed has been improved, and that is done through a performance update. So now whenever you're saving XCF files to your computer, it should happen faster. Also in regards to XCF files, GIMP now properly saves the various characteristics of a path. So with paths in GIMP, you can assign color tags to them, you can lock them, you can do various other things with them. GIMP now properly saves those characteristics when you're saving to a .xcf file. And they say that this is going to help with future vector features in GIMP. So I think this could be a path forward for vector shape features in GIMP. You also get improvements made to PSD files, which are Photoshop documents. So those now support exporting as CMYK, which is going to basically allow you to apply a soft proofing color profile for CMYK colors, and that should help with exporting CMYK compositions back to PSD files if you open them into GIMP. 2.99.14 also now supports metadata importing and exporting when it comes to using JPEG XL files. Exporting to ICNS or Apple icon files is now supported, so you can now create icons for Apple machines, or Apple apps and software, I should say. And finally, when you're importing a TIFF file, you now have the option to turn on Show Reduced Pages. So this is something that's going to be useful for people working in the medical field, because I guess certain documents have what's called reduced pages associated with them. If you don't work in the medical field, this is probably not going to relate to you, but is something worth mentioning. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and click the bell icon to be notified each time I have a brand new tutorial. You can check out any of the links related to this video in the description, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.